Alright guys, welcome to video number 12. This video will be discussing fonts. We'll probably break this up into a few videos, and I might not get to color tonight. I might have to leave that for tomorrow night, sorry about that. So, fonts can be a little complicated, probably more complicated than you think. I'm going to start with talking about the available fonts we have to us in web design, and you might think, well, what do you mean available fonts? Are there some fonts that are not available? And the answer to that is yes, there are some fonts that are not available to us. And you might say, well, I've seen lots of different fonts on the web. How come? Well, if you have some fancy fonts you've seen online, they're probably images. So let's talk about the ones that we do have available to us. Okay, and I'm going to rattle off a quick list here of fonts that are web-safe fonts, and you can rewind it and listen to it again, or you can just look up web-safe fonts on the web, and there's probably a ton of websites that have these listed. And then I'm going to give you a quick description of what each one does, or how you can use it, and then we'll move on to the next video. Okay, so here's a list: Verdana, Georgia, Times New Roman, Times, Arial, Helvetica, Tahoma, Comic Sans MS, Trebuchet, and Courier. Okay, so I've just listed about 10 fonts there. So you're limited about generally those 10 fonts as far as having them be safe to use on the web. And you might say, well, what do you mean safe to use on the web? Well, fonts are installed on a person's operating system. So if you pick a font to use on your website that a person doesn't have installed on their computer, it will not render. Okay, so meaning it will use whatever default font the browser wants because it can't find that font. And there's a few different types of fonts. I'm going to give you a few quick terms here, in case you haven't heard them. There's serif, there's sans serif, and there's monospace. Okay, and I think I'm a little bit off from my video here, but my mouse is going to move in a little bit and highlight what I mean. So a serif font basically means that it has little feet attached to each of the fonts. There's my mouse moving, see how I'm highlighting there? That's a serif font. And if you look at the letter L, for example, there's like a little base to it, right? The letter D, even when it ends at the bottom, has a little base. At the top, it has a little notch there. That's a serif font. Sans serif fonts are more blocky. They don't have that. And then monospace fonts are spaced equally. Each letter is spaced equally, whereas in the other fonts, they're not necessarily spaced equally. Okay. So let's go down the list. So the first one I named is Verdana. Okay, Verdana is super popular. I use it a lot on most of my websites. Reason being is that it's legible in various different sizes. It's very legible. And most people have this font installed. Something like, you're talking 99% of people have this font installed on their computers, so it's really safe to use. It's good to use for, lots of government websites use it, and blue chip business websites use it a lot. Okay. The next is Georgia, which is a serif font. It has a little curly cues on the top and bottom kind of thing. Georgia is an awesome font to use because it was designed specifically for screens. So in any variant, so if it's italic or if it's normal, it's going to look really clear. Okay. Times New Roman is similar to Georgia in that it's a serif font. Times New Roman's on the PC side. Okay. People now think that if you're going to use serif font to begin with, you might as well just use Georgia since it was designed for screens specifically. So if you're going to use a serif font, you can just name Georgia first. Okay. Times is similar to Times New Roman, except it's the Mac equivalent to Times New Roman. Okay. Those types of websites are good for excuse me, those types of fonts are good for things like financial institution websites, or if you want to give your website a newspapery type feel, that's the type of font you see in a newspaper. Right. Next is Arial. Like Verdana, it's a sans serif font, and it tends to lend itself more to a modern feel for websites, kind of like Verdana does. So that's a good font to use for that if you don't want to use Verdana. Helvetica think of it as the Mac equivalent to Arial. Okay, so you can use that for the same type of thing, kind of like a newer, modern type website. Same with Tahoma, although it's used for business websites. a lot. It really looks a lot like Verdana, and a lot of people use that as an alternative to Verdana. But Verdana, again, is installed almost on every computer in the world, so it's a good one to go with. Next one I listed was Comic Sans, and that's good for cartoony type fonts. In fact, I wouldn't really use Comic Sans for um, almost any website, even for cartoony type things, just because it's actually kind of an ugly font. Next is Trebuchet, which doesn't get used as often. I don't use it very often, um, but it's kind of like a contemporary type font. It's kind of a newer font type of feel, and it looks really good in smaller sizes. Okay, and then lastly we have Courier, which is a monospace font, meaning that every character has the same width. Um, so like an A is the same size as an L, okay, in terms of width and the amount of space it takes up. So if you were to like test that out, you would see the differences. It's kind of interesting. All right. So let's go look at your book. These are the three things we're going to cover in the next, probably the next video here. Font family, okay, font size, and use of color. And you've seen me use that in my own coding throughout the examples. But there's more things to fonts than just that. And he has some listed here at the bottom. His pattern, quote unquote, of how to write your different font styles. All right, so your properties are listed here with their potential values, and we'll cover all of these in the next video here. One other thing real quick, in case you're wondering where I'm at in the book, I'm in chapter 10. I'm kind of jumping around based on my videos rather than reading the book straight through, which isn't going to make as much sense, and then me creating a video for you. I'll teach you what you need to know in the right order, and then we'll go to the book. So right now I'm on chapter 10, page 201. Okay. And lastly, the last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the next video was the other types of fonts you've probably seen. So I have a sample layout here that I did not create. I just happened to find this online. And you see here that he's got, kind of like a funky font up here at the top. That's an image. Okay, so anytime you see fonts that don't match those few that I gave you, chances are it's an image, and I'm willing to bet that these other fonts here, that looks like Verdana to me. Yeah, that's probably Verdana. Okay, but anything else, so like this thing up at the top here, and this here in his little box is an image. Okay, these are pixels, so they don't need to be rendered based on the fonts that are installed on a person's operating system. It's just a picture, basically. Okay, so with that said, we're going to move on to the next video.